Hey guys, welcome to the channel. It's Jack with Stronghold Strength and Conditioning. And today, I'm showing you guys how to build strong, stable, and mobile hips. But before we get into it, make sure you take a moment and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on future content like this. Every Thursday, I'm putting out videos showing you how to resolve aches and pains, prevent injuries, and overall optimize your performance inside the gym and outside of it in your daily life and routine. And it doesn't get much better than that, so take advantage of it. Ready? Let's go ahead and dive into this one. All right guys, the topic of today's video, how to build strong, stable, and mobile hips. And the first thing I want to do is set some understanding of the design and purpose of the function of the hip and what it really is intended to do and what it's supposed to do for us so that we can truly put a definition to what stability looks like for that hip, as well as the strength around it and the mobility that you should have. Now, obviously, with the hip being a ball and socket joint, it is going to be one of our most mobile joints that we have, aside from the shoulder. It does sit inside the acetabulum, so we do have a little bit less range of motion than available at the shoulder due to its design, but it can have variations as well from person to person, which might also change things slightly at the hip. The mechanics will still have the same underlying effect. So in order to have a stable hip, we still have to have things present like torque and torsion through the system of the leg, which feed into stability of our knee and our sacrum, which is the lowest portion of our spinal column. So the hip is really, when we talk about building a stable hip and strengthening our hips, we're talking about stability of our knee and stability of our sacral and lumbar spine overall. And it is our first junction there from the extremity up into the core structures that we really need to make sure is working and functioning the way that it should, so that we don't suffer things like knee pain, that we don't suffer things like back pain, because that is going to be a huge key player in those types of aches and pains. Now, we've kind of already talked about the relationship with the foot and the hip here in previous videos as well, if you've been following along. So I'm going to link my How to Build Strong and Stable Feet video right here, and that is a big part of this. So I talk about torque and torsion. The hip is responsible for generating the torque, which is a piece of the torsion. The foot on the other end of that, and the knee even plays a small piece in this. We kind of talked about this in the last 2 weeks. It is the way that we transfer that torsion and the way that we generate friction and connection to the floor. So if our foot is off, our base is off, that can be one thing that actually affects the hip. But at the same time, if our hip is off, it could actually affect the foot. There's this cyclical relationship between the two where it's kind of one or the other, which came first, the chicken or the egg. And we got to make sure that both are working in the way that they should to optimize the stability of our leg overall and make sure that our knee isn't suffering the consequences of that. Likewise, if the hip is not functioning, it's likely that we'll feel some type of back pain because of pelvic instability, which then usually affects people in their lumbar spine mostly, but it can be sacral as well. So again, we're looking at stabilization from the hip in how do we control our knee and how are we able to control our pelvis overall, and that is a big key of it. Now, I've already done some of my favorite hip strengthening exercises that are all body weight, and I'm going to link that video as well up here, and all these links I'll put down in the description as well, so it's easier for you guys to access and you can just get right to it. But I'm not going over strengthening exercises per se, although I do consider stability a form of strength. It's kind of the minimalist portion of that strength and the lower end of it. So today what I'm going to be doing is showing you guys a few of my favorite RNT exercises, which is reactive neuromuscular training, to help build stability at the hip and cue the proper rotation for the position that we're working on. Now, that's important as well, so let's talk about that real quick here. The hip relies on different torques depending on the position of the hip. So when my hip is in flexion, external rotation becomes a more stable position for the hip. And that would be things like squatting, hinging, and the front leg of a lunge. Those are all positions that I want to do external rotation in the hip so that I control the knee better to stabilize in those positions. That could also be walking and running when the leg's out front. So we do a lot of movements that actually require more hip flexion and external rotation, which will be the main focus of what we're doing today. But I'm also going to show you guys some stuff for internal rotation of the hip, which becomes more important when our hip is in extension. Make sure I get that right. So when our hips are extended, internal rotation becomes the more stable position for our hip, and it's important that we know and have access to and can control internal rotation in those positions as well. So we're going to be looking at internal rotation stability as well as external rotation stability, although once again external rotation is more of our flexion position, which is our more common movement, so I will be focusing more heavily on those. All right, now that was a mouthful, so I hope you guys followed me on all that, but let's go ahead and start talking through it with the exercises here, and then we will be good to go from that point. Let's get into it. Okay, so we're going to start by using a block here, or you can use a ball, and we're going to be strengthening our internal rotation to begin with. And this is internal rotation torque. This is where we're most stable in extension. Now I know we're strengthening here in a hip flexed position, and we can actually isolate a lot of that musculature, the TFL, those pocket muscles, and those adductors in this hip flex position. But we're going to transition to one that's more functional after this. So this is just a good place to begin. Put a block between those legs, put the ball between those legs just in the inner thigh, and then we're opening, rotating off that block or ball as far as we're able to, pulling the small toes toward the shin, and you'll feel your ankle kind of curling in that way. Once you feel more competent and controlled in this, where you feel like your legs aren't trying to move around, the knees aren't going all over the place, you can take that block out and just do it with that 90-degree angle at the knees, 90-degree angle at the hip here. Once again, still seeing how far you can flex into that internally rotated position. It might feel like you're going to cramp up at the pockets there. That's that TFL muscle we're talking about. What I suggest is continuing to flex into it. Don't shy away from the cramp. Actually try and contract the muscle more. This usually helps with a cramping type feel when you can actually take control of it by concentrically contracting more into that flex each time. So don't shy away from cramping, see if you can actually flex tighter. And then the final variation of this is adding a band where we can finally add some resistance to it. Now obviously here you can go as heavy of a band as you want eventually, but I'm starting light and pulling open with, once again, maintaining that knee angle. If you still have trouble when you add the band in, you could put that block back in or that ball back in to give you something to pivot off of. And that's what we want to make sure is happening. There's that pivoting movement where our knees are staying in the parallel to one another there and not caving or touching one another, but also not falling wide open as we open those feet. So there's not a lot of movement from the upper leg. It's all the lower leg rotating the upper leg itself. Next, we're going to take this to a standing movement here, and like I said, internal rotation is key in hip extension. So here, first of all, we're using that band to help us restore hip extension. Honestly, this is a mobility that I use with a lot of my clients to help restore that hip extension. So the band is helping me pull into a good position. I want my glutes flexed, and you'll see in the small screen above that you can watch me with my small toes being the emphasis of my foot placement. So I'm really internally rotating that hip heavily here to stabilize this position. And it's nice because it mimics running, it mimics walking, and we're going into lunges from here where we feel the pelvis nice and stabilized. So my glutes are engaged, my abs are engaged, and my upper back is engaged, stacking my shoulders over my hips in this position. I have a nice wide triangle base. My feet are spread wide here. And this is one of the best ways to strengthen that internal rotation. Next, we're going to do some external rotation here, and this is the RNT effect that I was talking about. So we're using that band to actually try and pull my hip into internal rotation. The best place to begin is small reps, just letting the knee cave in, the hip internally rotate, and then externally rotating at the hip to pull that knee in line with the middle toe or the small toes even. But the key is that we're able to keep 3 points of contact from our foot at all time out front. So that's the first metatarsal behind the big toe, fifth metatarsal behind the small toe, and your heel. So those 3 points of contact are maintained. My glutes are engaging here, so I'm really squeezing so my pelvis is in a good position, and again my abs engaged so that I'm stacking well. Once I get strong enough at that external rotation, I can add the lunge back in now. So I'm standing up when that hip is externally rotated, and again the back leg is internally rotated, favoring those toes. You can see that from the front angle here. And I'm trying to maintain the position of the knee. So as I stand up and extend the legs, I want to make sure that that knee isn't collapsing toward my big toe, and I'm not falling inward toward the center line of my body. This is creating that stability that we're looking for here in external rotation. And the lunge is a cool position. I like to work unilateral first because it has both internal and external rotation present at the hips, just depending on whether the hip is out front or the hip is the one that's the leg out back. So we're getting to focus on both there, and it also is a great way to show any deficiencies or incompetencies that are going on there. Now, we can progress this as we get more competent with the lunges to a deficit. So now I'm doing a negative movement here, reaching my back leg toward the floor here as I try and maintain. And this will challenge your balance at first, so don't feel bad if you get it wrong. You're gonna try and keep that same alignment. So the knee lining up with the middle or small toes, making sure that band isn't pulling you in and caving in toward the center of your body again. So the same cue, just increasing the difficulty as we go here. Now, if you want to get stronger on these as well, you can also add some weight. So if I wanted to hold weight as I was doing these, that's another way I could progress this. Same thing with the previous lunge from the ground. If I wanted to get stronger at that prior to going into a step up position, then I could also add weight to those. But one of the best ways to check the stability of your hip is taking a step up. If you're going up a set of stairs and you look at your foot, your knee, your hip alignment, what's happening at your knee? Is your knee caving inward as you take those steps and as you press up on each step? Or is your knee maintaining a good line with the middle toes or the small toes as you step up? That is one of the easiest ways to check your hip stability, honestly. And here I'm just showing a different angle. Now we don't have the same cue as far as the band, but we can progress to body weight without the band or weighted without the band as we get stronger at this. You can also increase the depth of the step. So taking a higher step makes that a little bit harder. We're working into a deeper hip flexion at that point. So we can change the stimulus a little bit. But these are just some different options for you guys to start to progress from one to the next. The cue of the band is a great external cue to help keep that knee alignment, and that is one of the biggest things I want you to keep in mind is we're using that band to cue the external rotation that we want as our hip goes into these flexed positions here. And lastly, I do use RNT in some of my bilateral movements like squats and also a hinge here you'll see coming up. So here we can place a loop band around the knees, and I'm sure you've seen monster walks by this time or something like that. That is the purpose of a monster walk. So we're cueing externally by the pull of that band, the opening of the knees, the hip external rotation for stability of the hip. And we want it to go in both directions here. That's one of the biggest things with our squat. So from this bottom position, I want to be sure that I'm still driving my knees out into that band as I stand back up. There's usually a lapse in that bottom movement position to standing where people lose that connection and the knees cave in. And here's an example of a deadlift that you could use this with as well. So using the same glute band here, I'm cueing that my knees are driving open, although this is a hinge position, so it's mostly hip. You'll see slight bend at the knee, a mostly vertical shin, so knee right over the ankle. And the cue is that, one, the kettlebell's not touching that band because I'm using a good hinge, but it's also not allowing me to cave inward and use those adductors as my main stabilizers. We want those external rotators to stabilize the pelvis all the way to the standing position where those glutes are engaging at the fullest. All right, and there you guys have it. How to build strong, stable, and mobile hips, with our focus today being on the actual stability portion of that, with other resources that you guys can reference to look at how to get the strength. And in turn, you're gonna have more mobility based off of your strength around the hip, the stability of the hip, and overall the range of motion that you have around the hip. So be sure to check the links in the description, because those are all gonna play into how your hips are feeling and performing overall. And take advantage of all those videos that I've put together, because usually I'm not able to pack all the information that I need to into these videos. So it has to come in little bits and pieces at a time. Check those out. If you guys like this video, make sure you let me know by clicking that big thumbs up down below, and drop any questions in the comment section down below. I'm happy to talk to you guys about any questions that you have regarding maybe things that you're dealing with, or anything with the exercises that you had questions about in the video. And if you know somebody who has hip issues, be sure that you share this with them. You know that they need this type of content and this type of nudge to go in the right direction on improving that situation, so they don't have to deal with the low back pain and the knee pain. And it might even be just low back and knee pain that they're dealing with, and they don't realize it's their hip, because that's always a possibility as well. So share this with a friend, make sure they get that love too. If you guys have not, and you want to improve your overall mobility in general, be sure that you sign up for my 7-day mobility training challenge. That is linked down below in this description as well. It is 7 days of pre-programmed out mobility sessions, 15-minute sessions, no equipment necessary, and it's designed to be a litmus test to help you guys identify where you are missing range of motion, flexibility, and overall stability or motor control around the joints. It takes you from head to toe in a mini course that gives you also a basic systematic approach, some rules to engagement of mobility training as well. So you get to learn a little bit as you go, not only about yourself, but mobility training, and it is completely free. You can sign up today and get started today. The link is down below, so take advantage of that. Last but not least, before we go here, if you have not already, make sure you take a moment and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on future content like this. Every Thursday, I'm putting out videos showing you how to resolve the aches and pains, prevent the injuries, and overall optimize your performance inside the gym and outside of it in your daily routine, so you can stay physically active for longer. And it really doesn't get better than that, so take advantage of it. All right, guys, welcome to the Stronghold Army. I'll catch you next week.